So we're back with
Yeah.
Bergman, our wonderful author and publisher. Okay, so we were in the middle of talking about a story you were telling us.
Oh, I was talking about the fact that collaborations feel less scary to me now because I've done a lot of them, and so
Yeah.
it's if one of them crashes and burns, it's not that.
Right.
Listen, one of the things that is true about any kind of art making is that you try stuff, and sometimes it's better than you could have imagined, and
Yes.
sometimes it's worse than you could have imagined, and that's the work. That
That's
is
the nature
that's
of the
just
beast, or
part of
whatever
it.
you call it.
That's just part of the deal. um and I think that the thing that lets me feel more relaxed about it at nearly 50 than I was 25 years ago is
Ah,
that I've had a lot of opportunities to collaborate.
mm-hmm.
Some of that has taught me how to be a better collaborator. I feel much more confident in my skills as a collaborator now, but the other thing it's taught me is that sometimes it's not great, and
Yeah.
that is it's just part of the deal.
Sometimes that happens with youth because, when we're younger, we're like so go ahead and we don't necessarily, I also write, but I'm not an established like screenwriter like yourself. I've just written, a one woman show and a couple of projects I have now, but it certainly it's not like 25 years worth. So that's amazing. But sometimes when we're younger, we just go steamrolling ahead and we don't quite take the time to really, like you said, have other people read it or get some feedback from other people about how it hit them, the story, and if you got across your point or things like that.
And we don't know what we don't know. The
Right.
Dunning-Kruger effect is real, right? When I was a younger writer, I didn't
Right.
understand how valuable it was to read things aloud, or if I was feeling really uncertain about something, ask someone else to read it where I could listen to it. I didn't
Hmm.
understand that the most useful choice I could make was to do my job on the page. And
Hmm.
then if I wasn't the one who was going to be performing it, because I've also written and performed solo shows.
Right.
Um, but if I wasn't the one who was going to be performing it, there's really I didn't I still wanted to control everything. I felt like if I kept it all sort of in my grasp, then I
Right.
could make it be right,
Mm.
or I could make other people say it right or do it right. And that is, I think, generally speaking, an immature way
Hmm.
of working.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but not necessarily related to age. I definitely know people who are much younger than me who've 100% got that, and
Right.
people older than me who do not seem to have learned it. Uh,
Right. It kind of goes along the gradient scale of how receptive are they to feedback. Yeah, no, I understand totally.
but
I do have one question for you though. Oh, you wanted to
yeah.
say something else
Oh
about
no, I was
please
just
do.
gonna say,
Mhm.
I've also learned not to let myself get talked out of things if I feel strongly about them. Uh,
Oh, that's important.
there were definitely times, certainly as a younger person, where someone else would come in and say, this would be great if, we made it
Yeah.
into a musical, if we set it on Mars, if
Oh
we
no, and you're like,
whatever.
what? And you have to like change the whole script. Yes.
And that has never been, when someone has suggested something that complicates the the thing that I am trying to make in a way that distracts from the
Mhm.
storytelling rather than supports the storytelling, I've
Yes.
learned to just say no to it. There are people who
Right.
are afraid of a story and they want a
Mhm.
spectacle. And I am not opposed to a spectacle, but I don't write that way.
Right.
And I don't things that I have written that people have tried to turn into a spectacle, it does
Truth of
not.
it probably you're saying is not what your original intent was. So it's almost like, I wonder, sometimes, but you know what your original intent is. So if they finally do one of your stories into a movie or something, it's always great to probably be the writer consultant or whatever on set still or whatever. It's interesting. I did some reading about yourself. So I hope this is okay. Obviously, we're going to talk about the second book that we're going to be reading, Newton's Perfect Day, first. So we're reading the first two, then we're going to get to Tulip a little bit down the road, but because we already talked about Tulip a little bit. I wanted to ask you, I saw in your regular bio as well that you also do activism now in Canada, or are you also an activist for, human rights, gay rights? It sounds like you've been doing this for a really long time, even when you were a teenager. So that's really important for this month. I would love to hear a little bit about that. And you also did that for certain, you spoke out for certain, I don't want to say laws, but maybe they were things that were being talked about, maybe becoming laws in Washington or the United States. Am I right about that? Because I,
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm originally from the US. I was born
Mhm.
in New York, and then I lived in sort of around New England for a while, for a good chunk of it in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
But I was, uh I came out young. I was
Right,
15 in 1990 when
right,
I
right,
first came out as queer, which in 1990 there were not a lot of out teenagers. Now it's extremely common.
right,
But at
right,
the time it really wasn't.
right,
And I did a lot of political activism and lobbying around
wonderful,
gay straight alliances. I was a founding member of the first one. Uh,
wonderful. It's wonderful.
and I did a lot of lobbying around what at the time was called the Massachusetts Safe Schools Commission for Gay and Lesbian Youth.
Wow.
This
Wow.
was the 90s, so
Amazing.
we were not really yet talking about, we hadn't gotten to the
Right.
BTQA.
They hadn't really talked about that part yet.
We were
Yeah.
still gay and lesbian was still considered very progressive.
Right.
We're
Right.
mentioning lesbians now.
Yeah. Right. That is funny you say
Congratulations.
that.
And then when
Right.
bi people got involved, there were arguments about it. Anyway, that's a different
Yes,
interview.
it's funny. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I the idea of this commission was, someone Warren Blumenfeld, Fall Feld, Warren
Oh.
Blumenfeld had done research at the University of Massachusetts showing that a lot of queer and trans young people were dropping out of school because they were being so harassed and bullied
Boy.
at school,
Yeah. Yeah.
and a disproportionately high number of them were completing suicide because they felt they had
Right.
nowhere safe to
Right.
go and no one safe to talk to.
Right.
And I spent a lot of my teenage years back and forth between classes during the day
Mm-hmm.
and yelling about LGBTQ youth safety and wellness in the afternoons and evenings. And
Well,
then,
you were getting the word out there. They need people who are the founding members of these kinds of groups, communities, and that's amazing. That's really wonderful.
and I've kept it up. I have done a lot of activism, and especially these days, not to sound like the oldest old man in Old Manville, though
No, you don't.
I am.
You don't, right?
In queer activist
Yeah,
terms, though, I am very old, and that's a combination of I started young,
right.
and a lot of the people who are a generation older than me are dead,
Oh my goodness. Well, now obviously the
right?
whole tragedy of AIDS had occurred, and that did occur in those years. So,
In the
90.
80s and 90s.
Mhm.
And so, before we got protease inhibitors, like I was 15 years old, dying in with Queer Nation and ACT UP on the steps of
Mhm.
the Harvard Medical School
Wow.
because they had developed AIDS medications, which at the time were known as DDI and DDC. And
Mhm.
they were more promising than AZT, which was the first
I had heard about that.
um,
Mhm.
the first protease inhibitor, but it it was really hard on people's livers and shortened some people's lives while lengthening others.
Oh,
And so at Harvard Med, they had developed these two other drugs, which people were very excited about, but they wouldn't release them because of clinical trial
right.
FDA issues. And people living with AIDS were mad about it because their feeling, which I very much agreed with, was we
It'll
are dying,
extend our life, you know?
right? We're dying and we're dying really fast. We are willing to take the chance that this might kill us sooner, but it
Right.
might prolong our lives. Let us be the ones to make that decision.
Let us do a trial thing of the medicine. Did they finally end up doing that, or did
N-
they took a while?
Not not really. It
Oh,
took a
sorry.
while, and then other drugs were developed, but at the time it all felt very urgent. But
Right.
between one thing and the other, as someone who has been out for 33 years and like out
Wow.
as out and active as
Yes.
a queer person,
Yeah, but
right?
you're speaking out and getting the word out now in all these different ways. This is
in
amazing.
the in
Mhm.
the work, I'm old for queer
Okay.
activism. And I let me be clear, I feel great about that. I'm
Yes.
happy to have lived this long.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
am delighted to be old and cranky about things. I I and I
That's funny.
when I was a youth activist, I was very much in community with activists who had more experience than me. And
Mhm.
now that I'm on the more experienced end, I feel very grateful to be in community and in the work with youth activists who are, in some cases younger than I was when I came
Oh,
out, 12,
wow. Yeah,
13,
there's a lot of
14
kids
years
now
old.
that feel bold to be able to say, I know who I am younger and just accept
Mm,
me for who or what I am. So in the meantime, where were we? Oh, we were talking about the youth culture and how
mhm.
you've been helping them now, younger people than when yourself came out. I
Well,
think
I
it's
think that
safer now, right? To come out when you're younger, if you can deal with
I
your
think
parents.
I think it is somewhat safer,
Mhm.
which I hugely value. I certainly think it's different. Um, One of the things that I really notice is that, you know, for young people when they're coming out, they have the benefit of a lot more peer support, but
Right.
also it feels like less intergenerational support,
Mm,
which, pluses and minuses there.
right.
I'm delighted that, my children and their friends are able to see some really positive media representation
Oh, that's wonderful.
of,
Yeah.
LGBTQ2S people in books, in movies, in television. And, I think that they are really enriched by the fact that they know queer people and trans people who are adults, young
Mhm.
adults to quite old adults
Right.
who have different life experiences and who can help them to navigate things in a smart way.
Mhm.
Mm.
Oh, is that you? Okay, I was
Yeah,
wondering.
sorry. Just at 2 o'clock, my do not disturb expires.
Oh my goodness. Okay, no
That's the
worries.
end of my, that's when I usually get up from my desk and start doing other things.
Oh, no
This is,
worries.
you're
I have one
seeing
more
the,
question for you. I know this has gone long for you, and
oh
I know
no,
you
this
need
is
to
just
sleep.
the behind the scenes of my writing
Okay.
day,
All right. Well,
where
my
like
only other
the kids,
question. Oh, wait, what were you saying? I'm so sorry.
oh, I was going to say, behind the scenes of my writing work day, the kids go to school at 8:30, and then from 9 until 2 it's do not disturb, and I try to actually sit and get words written, and then at 2 o'clock all of the alarms turn on,
Oh
and
my gosh. How old are
then
your
it's time
children
to
now? How old are they
uh,
before they come in?
they are 8, 13, and 28.
Wow, they are all different ages. That's amazing. So you're definitely getting the spectrum when you're saying, you know, that there's different children of all different ages that are seeing positive reinforcements. You included with your mate as a wonderful family unit, you know, so they've grown up with that whole culture and community. That's amazing.
Mhm.
Seriously, that they're 8. Wow, this is wonderful though to hear this. I have one question for you though, with regard to
It's
the
okay.
second book that we're going to be reading. So down the road, we are going to read Tulip, but we decided to do your first book, which we've already mentioned. Is that for a boy or a girl that you wrote? Fantastic book, everybody. Fantastic book. And the second one is by an author, Ansley Simpson, Newton's Perfect Day.
Yes.
And so that's a lovely book too. That's going to be our second book that we're reading.
Fun.
Would you be able to tell us a teeny bit about that? Also, since you're the wonderful publisher, before we have to go today, which is so sad.
Sure.
This has been a great talk. I'd love to hear little words about the book. That would be so fantastic.
What I will say about Flamingo Rampant is when we got into the children's book business, the primary impetus was that so many of the queer and trans children's books were either super grim or really a little dull. You know, sometimes it was some people have 2 dads, and that's not terrible. The end. Right? Which, like, thank you. And that was absolutely revolutionary in the early
Right,
90s.
right.
When Heather Has Two Mommies came out 30 years ago, it set people on their ear. But we've moved.
Yes.
But when I started reading about children's literature in preparation for, you know, becoming a children's author and then founding a children's press, the
Mhm.
other thing that I learned about was that at the time in 2012, 7% of children's books featured kids or families of color. 93% were about white kids and families.
Okay, so a lot of families were not seeing themselves portrayed, just like on TV. A lot of families were not being portrayed. There's not just white families in our country and other countries.
93%. And so
That's crazy.
when we established Flamingo Rampant, we did it with 2 primary mandates. One, that we would not publish that we would publish books that were celebratory, joyful,
Yeah,
beautiful, and peaceful. Right? No bullying, no harassment, no your identity is a problem, no violence, no kids being made to feel bad about themselves.
thank God. Hmm.
And the second thing was half or more of every season, 6 books a season, because I came from a theater background. So when I
Right.
started a publishing company, I did it like a theater company.
Me
You have
too.
a
I love that.
season, it's
Hmm.
6 books a season. But listen, we only can do what we know, right? But the other thing was, so our mandate was that half of every season of books had to be written or illustrated by and feature kids and families of color.
That's great.
And that wasn't a goal, it was a rule,
That's
right?
wonderful. Yeah.
That was the deal. And so then that I created for myself a different problem that I didn't even know was a problem, which was very few authors and illustrators of color work in children's publishing because
Wow.
it has historically not been welcoming to them.
Wow.
And so that meant I had to go out and find them. So
Mhm.
here's where my community organizing background comes into play.
Where
I
did you
didn't
go? Did
I
you?
just I just reached out to my other friends in creative communities. I
Right.
talked I talked to writers and performers that I knew who were Black or Indigenous or otherwise people of color and said, "Have you ever thought about writing a children's book?"
Oh
And I
my
reached
God,
out
that's
to visual
wonderful.
artists and said the same thing. And and I listened for a further whatever decade to people in traditional publishing wringing their hands like, "Oh, we would love to publish more diverse books, but we can't find them anywhere." And I would sit in my chair and stew and say, "Did you ask anyone, or are
Right.
you just sitting there waiting for them to arrive on a silver platter?"
Right, because certain
So,
communities, if it's been a trouble to push forward in that area, you need someone to lead the way, kind of, right?
right, if there's no mentorship
Mhm.
pipeline in a particular industry, then you don't get right. Like if you don't
Right.
know other children's book writers who are Black or Indigenous or people of color, then you don't imagine that that is something that is open to you. And if you try a couple of times and every time the publisher says, "Oh, it's cute, but it's too niche." Too niche is code for this features people of color, disabled people, or queer or trans people,
Yeah,
right?
too
Just
specific, a group.
right.
This is what I loved about your book. May I interject this?
Oh
Your
yeah,
fantastically written book, I'm just going to say it one more time. Is that for a boy or a girl? It has, I don't want to ruin the surprise for people that are going to be hearing this book be read, but it has every type of person and background and lovely child in here. And there is someone that's disabled in this book. And I just think it's, not that we're just gearing towards that, but I love that it included every type of child, and I just loved it. And the illustrations are just fantastic. Can I show one of the illustrations? Do you
of
mind?
course.
Look at this. She's on the bus and she's hanging upside down. I just was that a clear, could you see that clearly?
Oh
Did I
yeah, it's very clear and
so
very
amazing. We've got
from
a
life.
wonderful person, a child running. I mean, I'm telling you now, it was outstanding. That's why it was chosen as the first book. But also, you're the author and our wonderful publisher, so we wanted to give you tribute and
Which
yeah.
of course I appreciate. But for me, this
Mhm.
was as important as doing the work of joyful and celebratory books with queer and trans kids and families. And so
Right.
by the time we got to Newton's Perfect Day, I had started to understand who was generally good at writing a children's book. And what I figured out was theater performers, performance
Yes.
poets, and songwriters all did very well.
Yeah, we're all storytellers, right? Like you were
Yes,
saying. Mhm.
absolutely. And so Ansley Simpson is the mom of one of my 13-year-old's former classmates.
That's
And
great. Oh my God,
we
really?
we were parents together at school. She's
Mhm.
Anishinaabe and from Ontario, where we lived until just recently. And she's a brilliant
Wow.
songwriter and just a really lovely person. And so one day we were talking about Indigenous education at school in a like two parents on the playground while their children roll around in the mud kind of way.
Right.
And she was talking about the fact that in Indigenous children's books, a lot of the books are very based on like folklore and
Mm.
stories of customs or life on the reserve, if they're not about violence and genocide.
Oh
And then
God, yes,
she
because that's
really,
correct. There is
yes,
indigenous, there is a tribal indigenous, there are words in here that are from her culture. That's
yeah.
right. That's another reason I loved this story. Anyway, continue. I'm sorry.
No,
Mhm.
no. And so, and she said, you know what I would really love to see just once is an urban Indigenous story about an Indigenous kid who is both connected to her culture and lives in a city and does like other city kid things. And
Right.
my little the gears started to turn, a little puff of smoke emerged from my ear.
That's
And a
good.
week later, I went back to her and said, I'm wondering if that's a story that you would like to write.
That's
And
fantastic.
she was up for the challenge. And you can really, in that book, because of the way that like the rhythm of the story is and she uses a lot of onomatopoeia like zip, buzz,
Yeah,
swoosh,
she uses sounding words,
bing,
definitely.
all kinds of things like that. You
Yeah.
can really get her songwriter instincts, the
Mhm.
cadence of the words and the way that she includes so much playful sound language.
Right.
Uh, it was a great match. And then she was really clear, and I 100% agreed that it felt very important for her to also have an Indigenous illustrator. And so I went shopping on Instagram
Wow, you
for
found an illustrator.
I have done this more than once. Young artists and even older artists, but especially young artists are on Instagram. They're showing off what they can do. And Rael McGregor, who's great and had a style that really worked for this book.
I wanted to show you one of the what he was talking about, this
Oh
wonderful
yes, right?
the
They're the
cover
cousins, double
picture is
A and
amazing. Look
B.
at that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very cool.
Uh, I saw Rail's work and wrote to them to say, I am interested in this. This is my publishing company. Would you like to meet and talk about the possibility of illustrating a book? And it was during COVID. So we had the most
Perfect.
like ridiculous meeting where we met outside the Royal Ontario Museum. I had packed a picnic. I had like hot apple cider and cookies. And
That's
we
one way to get
sat.
someone to do something. Cookies, definitely.
I'm Jewish.
Yes, me too.
I've never had,
Right.
I've never gone to
Right.
anything that wasn't improved by the appearance of snacks. Just, I'll say
You
that.
know, food is important. It's as
We
important
sat
as
outside and we
so much.
had cookies and hot apple cider out of my big thermos. And
Aw,
by the end of it, I had an illustrator, right? Like
so talented.
some of the work has been find the people that you need who aren't going to come and knock at your door, but who can do the thing that you
Yes.
want to do. And, the same, I don't know, boldness that allowed me to be a youth activist and the same
Right.
confidence that I have built in collaboration has also served me very well in going out and finding the people that Flamingo Rampant needs to make mission driven children's books. Sometimes you just have to go find the right folks.
Well, now
And
let me ask you something because and I agree with you there. I think that's really brilliant of you, and that's what makes you really innovative as a publisher, because this is about wonderful stories and things that need to get out there. And part of the reason of Read to Me, Heidi is always seeking new stories and or children's stories to help narrate live. With I'll just tell you one thing with our little mouse puppet, Millicent, as the sidekick. Anyway, here she is. She's just sitting over here watching our wonderful interview. I'll just put her back over here. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because it's kind of like here at Reach Me Heidi, we're always looking for wonderful stories to educate children, and it started out with people that were in hospitals, young kids, and people that were not necessarily having families around them to read to them at nap time or in the evening. Maybe their parents were both working too hard because they were very sick and needed to pay the bill from, whatever the reason was. And but I wanted people to know how they could know. I'm going to, of course, write it in a paragraph at the underneath our wonderful video that'll be up there. But will you please also just tell people where they can find flamingorampant.com is where people can go directly to buy your books. But are there other places people can connect with you to hear about some of the things you're talking about it? Are you on Instagram and are you on other places? Can you just tell us that before we have to go? I feel so bad. We have 6 minutes left.
for
Tell us how
sure.
we can reach you.
We're Flamingo Rampant on Instagram and Twitter
Okay.
and Facebook. We keep, those things somewhat updated. Very
Yes.
often there'll be sort of a flurry of activity and then it'll be quiet for a while I, do the back end part and then it comes to life again. But we're, go into any bookstore and ask for whatever title you see on our website, especially your local independent bookstore if you have one. I would, I love when people are at their bookstores, you can request them from your library, or encourage your library to get them, or your kid's school library.
That's
That's
the
great.
thing.
Hmm.
I'd like to get the word out so people can be encouraged to have your books elsewhere as well, because we're going to, of course, talk about them quite a bit. These are the first two that we have that we're starting to read of this wonderful living author, S. Bergman. But we want to promote your publishing company. So we, of course, will have all the information as well in the box that features this story, but also I'm going to put it on my page. Somehow we're going to have that up there to make sure you're featured. And this is probably maybe the first of a couple of times we'll ask to talk to you about different books, if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
Even
And
though
we
we
have amazing authors that you can talk to as well.
yes, which is awesome. I mean,
Well,
some of the other
set
books
you up.
we have here that are going to be read down the road are going to be, excuse me,
Oh, the Great Space Adventure. See, a kid gets to go to the moon. We love that.
and the Zero Dance Club. That's another inclusive kind of a thing. So we've got a bunch of different things that are going to be coming up for you of some of the books that Bear publishes, as well as that he's written. And so please join us for our first story that's going to be posted in the next day or so. And it will be this lovely book here. Is that for a boy or a girl? Yay, S. Bear Bergman. Is there anything else you wanted to say in your closing words? We have 3 minutes.
No, this was super fun, and I'm really glad to be talking. And let me know when you are ready to talk to some of the authors. They are also delightful. We'll make it happen for you.
Okay, yes, great. We would love that. We would really, really love that. It's interesting. You're our first person that we've been interviewing on this channel. It's just been me doing live readings with Millicent, but it needs to be changed up a bit, and we're going into the modern age now. And so thank you so much for joining us from Canada.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic.
I've loved this.
Aw, yay. Thank you so much.